Hey everybody! So in this video, we're going to be talking about common misconceptions that we hear a lot about the trauma aspect of the origins of DID and OSDD. Now, while the vast majority of people who've ever heard of DID or OSDD understand that the origin is trauma, very few people understand what that really means. And one of the common misconceptions that we hear a lot is that the trauma that creates DID or OSDD had to be extreme. Now, while this certainly can be the case for some, it isn't the case for everyone. It doesn't have to be long-term and extreme. It only has to be traumatic enough for the individual child experiencing it who is prone to dissociation for them to develop DID or OSDD. There is not one set amount of trauma that is required. It is whatever that particular individual is unable to cope with. That's all that's required. The second common misconception that we hear a lot is people assume that anyone who has DID or OSDD has it because of abuse. Now, while abuse is not at all an uncommon form of trauma to create DID or OSDD, it's not the only option. There are plenty of systems out there who developed DID or OSDD because of neglect, because of invasive medical treatments, natural disasters, growing up in an unsafe environment such as a war zone or where there was a lot of crime, seeing others abused or harmed, bullying, which we count as abuse but many people don't, so we wanted to name that as well. It's not always abuse that creates DID or OSDD. It's trauma in general. And that trauma can be anything that is negative enough for the individual. Because what is traumatic to one person may not be traumatic to another person. So remember, don't assume what someone's trauma is. And unless they choose to share that information with you, it is not your business. Please leave it alone. And the misconception that we hear a lot is that in order for a person to have DID or OSDD, their trauma had to have happened for a long time. And this is not really the case. In all reality, a person can develop DID or OSDD from a single instance of trauma, if that trauma was severe enough for them as an individual to need to dissociate to cope. Especially when you take into account that in order to develop a dissociative disorder like DID or OSDD, you have to have an unstable attachment to your caregivers. That's going to mean that you're liable not to get the support you need after the trauma, and that in and of itself can be traumatic. So remember that there is no set duration that the trauma has to go on for a person to develop a dissociative disorder. And that trauma could have happened once, it could have happened twice, it could have happened 100 times, or there could have been several different traumas. There's no one set thing that has to happen. And a final misconception that we hear a lot is that people assume that once a person has developed DID, that everyone in the system comes from those childhood traumas or trauma, and this is not the case. In reality, once a person has begun using dissociation to cope and has developed DID or OSDD, any severe enough stress any severe enough traumatic event for the individual system can create another split. DID can only be developed in childhood, but that does not mean that a person can only split in childhood. There can be further splits within the system throughout the life of the system. As long as they continue to be placed in high stress or traumatic situations, new splits can happen. And what causes a split in one system may not cause a split in another system. It's all very individual. So overall, please remember, don't assume what someone's experiences are. Don't assume the way that they function. And unless the system chooses to share that information with you, respect their boundaries and just leave it alone. It isn't your business. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And if you did, please like, subscribe, and don't forget to hit that notification bell. Have a good day, everybody.